Well, welcome everyone to the Wealthy Speaker Show. Ooh, boy, we are in for a treat. One of the things I love to do over here is introduce our audience to superstars and people who don't do it the same as everybody else. Love that. Andrea Owen, welcome.
I am so excited to be here, Jane. As a client of yours and an avid listener of your show, I'm honored.
Oh, yay. Now, one of the things I want people to know, I'm going to kind of key on some of your bio items here, but one of the things that I really want people to know is that you have this kind of edginess and flair to you that not everybody would be brave enough to do. And tell me about your intention behind some of that. Like, for instance, what is the title of your second book? I think it is.
Well, I hope that I'm allowed to say bad words. So if anyone's listening who has young listeners, it's not one of the worst words, but it's called How to Stop Feeling Like Shit. That was my second book, came out in 2018.
Right. And it's done really, really well. It keeps popping up
Mhm.
in my Audible feed. Like, so I see your
Well, then you
book.
should buy it.
I see your book every time. I've already got it. I've already
Okay.
got it. Okay. So, but in turn, I mean, to label a book that
Yeah.
we're a lot of us listening, a lot of our listeners are authors. Like that took some chutzpah. Talk
Mhm.
about what led to that decision and how you even decided that you were going to be different than everybody else.
Well, I should start by saying I started my life coaching practice. I started coaching in 2007 and I officially launched, the website and the LLC, like all of that official stuff in 2010. So
Mhm.
this in internet years, that was 100 years ago, right? Like, so it was before we saw this explosion of life coaching, which I'm super glad that life coaching has become so mainstream. But
Mhm.
back then, this was, in about 08, 09, I had a blog and a mentor of mine, I had her read it and she said, I think maybe you should not use any foul or colorful language. And it wasn't like I was dropping F bombs every sentence. It was
Yeah.
maybe, it was just peppered in. It's just my personality. I write how
Yeah.
I talk.
Right.
And I actually took her advice for about 2.5 minutes and then decided no, that's just not me. I wasn't going to be separate in my professional life and my personal life. Like, isn't this why we become entrepreneurs? If I
Mhm.
wanted to be buttoned up and professional, then I would go back to corporate, which
Yes.
was tricky for me sometimes. So, I didn't set out to be anything other than myself, really.
I love
And,
that.
but, I will say too, for the sake of transparency, there's been times where I've had to remind myself, Andrea, it's okay for you to be truly who you are because I worry, I still want everyone to like me.
Every
So
yeah.
yeah,
Who wants to get the haters coming after us on
right.
the internet, as you know? I know you have a lot of followers on Instagram, so you probably see your share of good and
Seen it
bad.
all. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tell everybody before we dive too far in about your current business model and who you help.
So the vast majority of my clients in my community are women, but I do get the occasional client who's a man. Actually, I have two of them right now, and they're
Okay.
fantastic. But I usually serve women, and I do private coaching, and I write books. That's the majority of my income, as well as speak on stages. So
Mm.
I made a little bit of a left turn back in, I think it was 2018 or 2019, and I decided to not do group coaching anymore. I had a really hard time making that decision because from a marketing standpoint and just economically, it makes sense to have the one to many model. And I didn't love it. I love co-hosting
Mm.
programs with colleagues of mine, but I don't like running them solo. And it was hard for me to let that go just from a financial standpoint. But now that I have, it's opened up more opportunity for me to speak
Interesting.
and just write books. And that's kind of the model in a nutshell.
Nice. And you and I are both CTI trained. That's Coaches
Yes.
Training Institute. I forgot that we had that in common until I read your bio. So that kind of takes me back a little bit. Now, clearly, you are an amazing writer. Your books have done, just give us some of the stats on your books.
I think total. So I don't like looking at stats. I always feel like it's either too many or never enough, right?
No, but your stats are good. Your stats are
I
amazing.
wish that I was better about it. I know some authors, are always checking their Amazon author page and oh gosh. So last I checked, I believe that my second book had crossed the 250,000 mark. And I've sold a lot more in audiobook, which is also very interesting, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
But and then this one just came out, so we don't have any stats on it yet, but pre-orders have been doing really well.
Okay, so the book is called Make Some Noise.
Yes,
I want to
ma'am.
say the subtitle because I think it's important. Speak your mind and own your strength. And I absolutely love that. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Your books have also been translated into 18 languages and are available in 22 countries. And I just want people to know that people love your work. They love your book. And I suspect it's that kind of authentically gritty, real that comes through in your work, which is why everybody loves it so much. But also, tell everybody the name of your podcast?
The podcast used to be called Your Kick-Ass Life, which was the name of my business for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the birth of this last book, I switched it to Make Some Noise. So the podcast and my latest book are both called Make Some Noise.
I love it. And 3 million downloads today.
Yeah.
So I think that is also something that is just incredibly phenomenal. As a podcaster, as an author, I have not done any of those things. So I really admire you and what you have done.
Well, I want to speak to that for a second, Jane, if I can, because I do think that, so when all those foreign, my books are traditionally published. So I have a literary agent. And when all of those foreign inquiries and deals started to come through, I think when we got to the fifth one, I asked my literary agent, like, is this common? Because it didn't happen. I only had one foreign deal for my first book.
Right.
And he said, not this many, like we might see a handful, but this many this early on. So it was right when my book came out.
Right.
And I'm not saying this to undermine my talent at all. So I think it's I think, yes, I'm a talented writer. And also that second book had a really great title. And that matters.
That was the how to stop
feeling like shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just was, it's one of those things where, I often tell people, especially who are coaches, or even if somebody's, creating a keynote, like the title of it doesn't really matter. Like clarity always trumps clever. But if you can have both, like,
then you're in
like,
business.
Sky's the limit, for sure.
We often say clear over clever, for sure. But if you can have clever, then yay you.
Yeah.
And now, the newest book, Make Some Noise, Speak Your Mind and Own Your Strength. I know from firsthand experience that standing tall in your strength, standing tall in your fees, standing tall in our brilliance doesn't come easy for everybody, and maybe even especially women. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, and I thank you for pointing that out. And I think our culture is difficult for both men and women in different ways. And since I write for women, and if we're talking about speaking our opinions and standing in our fees, et cetera, for women, this can be tricky because we're typically raised to be more quiet, to be accommodating and flexible, to put everyone's comfort before our own, to be nurturing and caring and polite first. And not that those are bad attributes. They're fantastic, but at what cost? It's no secret that women, even in the speaking field, tend to get paid less than men do.
Yep.
And it's both, just a problem culturally in every industry, as well as that we as women tend to have a harder time. Again, I'm speaking generally here. There's always exceptions, but we tend to have a harder time negotiating salaries, negotiating fees. We tend to undervalue ourselves and undercharge. So that's a lot of what the book is about getting curious about the culture you were raised in, as well as trying to pave a new path so you can learn new ways of being that are in alignment with your values.
Yeah, I just wrote a little post about tall poppy syndrome.
Yes.
And in Australia, that's like poo-pooed upon. They don't want people to, stand out from the rest. And I was saying, hey, we need to be tall poppies. I mean,
Right.
that's the way to go. And I think that you're out there doing it, and I love it. Um, Tell me a little bit about Make Some Noise. What are some of the key ideas, what are the things that you most love about this?
Oh, there's so many things. Like, how do I bottom line this?
Yeah.
Well, the opening chapter is called Take Up Space. And that is a term that is getting thrown around a lot, especially in the personal development spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So, what that actually means is taking up space with your voice. So this means, asking for setting your fees and not backpedaling or giving a discount or, giving 17,000 extras because you're afraid you're charging too much. It
Yes.
is also stating your opinion, even if it's unpopular. And it's also perhaps asking for what you want from a partner, a coworker, your children, et
Your
cetera.
family. Yes. Yes.
Yes, the boundaries conversation. And it's also
Mhm.
taking up space with your body. So this might even be just size acceptance or wearing whatever it is that you want, self-expression. And then taking up space is also with your power and your confidence. And that means, deciding that you belong in rooms where decisions are being made, or deciding that you are in fact a leader and defining what leadership means to you. So taking up space can look like a lot of different things, but I like people to get specific about it in
Yeah.
their life.
Like, where do you want to take up space in the industry? You want
Right.
to claim this piece of the pie, and that, this is where I am the number one expert. I remember a long time ago, probably close to 20 years ago, someone who was not psychic, but kind of in that genre. I think he kind of reads auras of people, and he saw me in a room at a speakers event. And back then, I was very much a behind the scenes, pushing people along type of person.
Mhm.
I was not in the spotlight myself. He said, I've never seen anyone trying so hard to be invisible. And I thought, wow, that was a big eye opener for me. I had no idea. But it's actually taken me a long time to just keep taking my place, take up my space, right?
Yeah.
And build and build and build. And it doesn't, you don't start there. You don't
No.
start at the top of this mountain. You have to work your way towards that. And for
There's really
people,
something to be said for experience, and that's how self-confidence is built through
yes.
action and experience. You don't get there just by reading about it or listening to us talk about it on a podcast or, reading a book about it. You have to actually take action. And then with time, with age, comes self-confidence. But that doesn't mean that someone listening to this at 25, 30 years old
Mhm.
can't get self-confidence. It's not just suddenly bestowed on you once you turn 40. So it's about action and experience. And it's also about competence and mastery. So getting up on stages and doing those talks, or even, I remember when the very first time I got invited to speak up on a big stage, like with the big TVs. I don't know, even know what they're called. Like,
IMEGs,
yeah, thank
IMEGs.
you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was getting paid a lot of money and there was a lot of people in the audience. I must have gone over that keynote probably 40 or 50 times, like
Wow.
full out in my office, because I wanted to nail it. I wanted to have enough confidence when I walked up there
Yeah.
so that with all the nerves I knew I was going to have, at least I would nail the talk.
Yeah. And
Even
how
if
did
my
that
mind went
go?
blank, I would have something to say up there. So
Yeah.
that's how you build self-confidence.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, you also talk in the book about money, and
Mhm.
I love to talk about
I do
money.
too.
And I agree with you that there are not just women, men and women who are reluctant to stand tall in their fees. And having raised my fees during COVID, I can honestly say that I feel quite proud of and having never negotiated my fee in the last like 5 years. I think the last client I fired when they had negotiated my fee, they ended up not being a good fit. And
Mhm.
so I just think that it's a real mentality. Talk about mindset and money and how they go together.
Oh gosh, the money conversation. Well, I think that first we need to accept how loaded and emotional it is. Money isn't just money. It's not just currency and it's black or white. It is the only currency that we use. I mean, it's the most common currency we use.
Right.
And at the same time, it's super emotional. So I encourage people to do what all of the money books tell you. Start from the beginning. What is your money story? Even people who do stand tall in their fees and feel like they don't have a lot of hangups about money, I think
Mhm.
it's a good idea to do the exercises anyway. There's so many great
Yeah.
books on out there that start with that. And if we're talking about money, there's and women, there's been recent studies that show that women tend to be very confident and competent when it comes to managing household finances. But when it comes to things like investments, when it comes to things like saving and, maybe if they are a working woman putting their fees out there, they are less confident. And that's the thing that I want to change, because my clientele is women and we have to start having these conversations. We
Mhm.
have to start digging in to the why. And I know that you do a lot of mindset work. So much of it is mindset and getting really curious about why you feel that way or why you are undercharging, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And that money story that you talked about, your money story may be that your entire life growing up, you heard money doesn't grow on trees or something like that. I heard that all growing up. And what I equated that to was that you have to work really hard to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And once I recognized, hey, actually, I read the 4 Hour Work Week. That totally changed how I thought about everything, including
Mhm.
money. And that's actually not true. And I know that your goal is to have a business and a lifestyle. Talk a little
Yeah.
bit about lifestyle.
Well, I want to circle back really quick to something you said, because I think it's so important, that money story. I love this conversation. So for a long time, so around 2015, my close colleagues and we were all into our money work. And some of my friends had clear money stories. I have one friend and her parents were born again Christians and they did mission work. So she always felt like the charity case, getting the hand-me-downs like from her school friends. I have
Yeah.
another friend who her parents were divorced and her mom was a single mom who didn't get child support from her dad. So she had her own stuff. My
Mm.
parents never talked about money. We
Ah,
weren't super wealthy, but we
silence.
also we were like middle class. We went
Yeah.
on vacations, but they were like kind of boring, to like the Grand Canyon, like we weren't
Yeah.
going to Europe or anything, but still it was just never talked about. And then my dad switched jobs and started, he was a real estate agent in the 80s and it was a booming business and started making more money. We moved into a bigger, nicer house. And a few years later, my parents got divorced.
Ah.
And I didn't know this until I was 39 or 40, but I had an unconscious story that if a family makes more money and becomes a little more wealthier, that is the demise of the family.
Oh my goodness.
I cried so hard, Jane, in that money workshop. When I
Wow.
realized that was my money story, I had no idea it was locked up in there. I just got
Mm.
goosebumps telling the story because I had been stuck. I had been plateaued for 3 years in a row at $60,000. I could not break it. And it didn't make sense because my audience had grown substantially. Even my OBM, Emily, who she was like, it kind of doesn't make sense. Like you should be making more money.
Yeah.
But once I unlocked that, I broke six figures that year and have
Mhm.
continued to jump. So, and I am a little skeptical when it comes to super woo woo stuff. Like I'm not super woo woo, but
Yeah.
that money work, that can take you to the next level.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's all about whatever your thought is. And I love expanding it from what your thought is to what's your money story and really digging into that. And someday I'm hoping you and I are going to do a master's class for our school on what's your money story.
I would love to. Yeah,
That would
and
be
because a lot
so
of
much
times it's
fun.
it's unconscious.
Yeah, it is totally unconscious. And
Hmm.
you just don't really realize what
Yeah,
it is that you actually think about it until you dig in.
exactly.
Okay, at
And
the
I'm sorry, I
end,
forgot what your other question was.
I don't remember either. Sorry, listener. Circle back, send us a note. What There's a piece at the end of each chapter about unlearning. Tell everybody what that is all about.
I wanted to give people, I mean, who doesn't love a step-by-step process, right?
Yes.
A ready, aim, fire, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I wanted to give the listener, although personal development is never linear, but I wanted them to have something to think about no matter what the topic is, so they can start to unpack their own stuff. So it's
Mhm.
4 steps. The very first one is to notice. So this is, you need to notice where you are undercharging. Notice where you are hesitating before, when you get an email saying, what is your speaker's fee? Notice when you're doing those things. And then from there, it's about getting curious. So it's not, when you start to notice that you're hesitating or undercharging, it's not good or bad. I just want you to get curious about it. Like, why do you think you're undercharging?
Right, right.
What I'm curious about the
From,
hesitation. What's
from a
there?
neutral place. Yeah.
Exactly. Total neutrality. It doesn't have a charge. So get curious and ask yourself a lot of questions. And then the third step is self-compassion, because no one beats themselves up into charging more. No one beats themselves up into betterment. You have to have a dose of self-compassion so that you can continue to do the work instead of spinning and staying stuck. And then the last step is keep the momentum. So this might be having conversations with your colleagues about it. It might be talking to your friends about a certain podcast episode that you listen to, or book that you're reading. So it allows it to stay fresh in your mind so that you don't just, put the self-help book away and continue scrolling
and not
through
do
Instagram.
anything with it.
Right.
I love that. I love that. And so in the case of the first chapter, take up space, you're noticing, where am I taking up space? Where am I not? Where am I shrinking into the corner to be invisible? And then I'll be curious about how I am being in the world. And then I can have some self-compassion for myself. And then if I talk to people about it, I can kind of be more aware. Like, awareness is 50% of the game, don't you think? Like, once you become aware, like I was years ago with Chris, he said I was trying to be invisible, and I'm like, what? No, don't be ridiculous. Anyway, it really, I became so aware, hyper aware, that it did take me a few years, but I actually decided to break through and break out of that.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's a great example. Your example about the invisibility, and I think that is a lot of people.
Take up space. I make some noise. Okay, so people might see you on the big stages, which they do. And by the way, Andrea's got an amazing market with direct selling companies. Who else are women's conferences, obviously. Who else did we talk about putting you in front of?
Well, leadership conferences, women's conferences, even sales, I speak mostly on self-confidence and resilience,
Yes.
which are inextricably connected. So yes, direct sales love me because I'm enthusiastic.
And talk about making some noise. You walk into one of those big stadium events and you will make some noise. And that's the perfect, really the perfect theme for anybody who wants to really see their people step out of their comfort zones. So if anybody sees you doing your thing, they might not realize that you've got things going on in the background. You just had a diagnosis recently. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I put it, if anyone's been a client of Jane, you know that we get these intake forms, kind of catching her up before we meet. And I wrote that, didn't I write it as like one of my celebrations?
Well, yeah, I guess it was a relief to kind of know exactly what was going on in your brain.
Going on in my head. Right.
So ADHD was one of them, right?
Yes. Impulse control disorder, nonverbal learning disorder, as well as auditory processing disorder. So I knew about the auditory processing disorder because my son was diagnosed with it about 7 years ago when he was in kindergarten. And I heard about it from the psychologist and I was like, oh my God, you mean that's not normal?
Oh.
Not a neurotypical brain.
Now, is that the one that we talked about that is kind of like cocktail hearing?
Yes.
Like if you're at a cocktail party, all of the noises are at the same volume and you can't concentrate on, my husband has cocktail hearing, although he's really just probably moderately deaf, but hearing impaired, I should say. And, he has a really hard time concentrating on a conversation because the volume all around him is too high.
And not only that, and it depends on the situation, but somebody who has, and there's also a broader scope of it called sensory processing disorder. And some people have it with sight, smell, different senses. Sometimes they're sensory seeking or avoidant. And so auditory processing is people who we just struggle with auditory. So not only is the volume, like we kind of don't have a mute button. So a lot of people, if you're in a restaurant and you're having, if you and I are sitting across the table from each other and it's like a sports bar, which is like my worst nightmare, with like TVs on and there's a baby crying and there's somebody right behind me having a conversation. Not only do I have a heck of a time hearing you, but also my anxiety is slowly rising, which sort of, it's like a negative feedback loop and it just gets worse and worse. And then I start sweating and it's rough. And I've just sort of learned to live with it or avoid places like sports bars.
Now you understand and you can put yourself into situations that will allow you, if you're having a client meeting, let's go to this nice quiet restaurant that I know about.
Yeah.
They don't play music. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I'm up on stages, it can be
talk
challenging if someone's phone is ringing, which is challenging for anyone, if you're up on stage. And even if you don't have sensory processing disorder, it's distracting.
Right.
But for someone like me, what's really hard is events where people are having lunch because of all of the silverware, the
clinking of the silverware on the plates. Oh, wow.
So there's medication.
So you're sitting there getting ready to go on, right? Usually hopefully they're clearing before you actually go on. And I bet like the people at the table are probably trying to talk to you. Mm-hmm. And you've got like this giant buzz happening in the back of your brain and it's really hard to concentrate or mentally prepare for your speech.
Right.
Interesting.
It's tricky. And, I'm 46, so I've learned coping mechanisms along the way. I have noticed that it's gotten worse as I've gotten older. And I have read, I don't know how true this is, but I've read that perimenopause also throws a wrench.
Yeah. I think your your concentration levels, I think, are affected.
Right. And ADHD, I was suspicious. So my daughter was diagnosed and she's 11. And the psychologist was telling us how it shows up differently in girls. And it's often missed because it's a misconception that ADHD is like a hyperactive little boy's problem. Right.
Yes.
And I got really curious when she started to describe all of the sort of symptoms of ADHD in girls and women. And I got home and I asked my husband, and I'm like, so you mean you don't do this? You don't do this? And then I realized that all the quirks that people tease me about are ADHD symptoms. Really? And I don't, when I had the test, like one of the questions was, she said, do you often forget appointments on your calendar? And I said, absolutely not, because I have an assistant who color codes my calendar.
Yeah, you have to write it down.
I've coped. I've learned systems to be professional, which I will say, neurodiversity is amazing for entrepreneurship. It truly is, because, especially with impulse control disorder, I have a high risk tolerance. I make decisions very quickly. I'm impulsive, which is great for entrepreneurship. Not great with drugs and alcohol. Yeah. I've been sober for almost 10 years because of that. But I think neurodiversity is one of those things too, that's becoming more and more commonplace that we're talking about, and we know more about it. You're seeing a lot more adults get diagnosed and get help for it if they find the need. So I'm excited about the future and what that holds for neurodiversity.
Well, I just want to say, for those of you who are listening in, who maybe haven't had a diagnosis yet, but you've always suspected that something was going on, just know that you're not alone. There are so many people, and this conversation in the US is just beginning. In Canada, we're a little bit ahead.
Okay.
We actually have one of our big phone companies here, Bell, has a huge initiative called Bell Talks, and it's all about mental health. And so we've been doing it for a number of years now, but I feel like we're just at the beginning of the wave of destigmatizing mental illness and really allowing people to talk about it with their friends more openly. And hey, hopefully what you're sharing here today, Andrea, gives somebody the permission to call up a friend and say, hey, I think I'm struggling with something.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for mentioning that. And just really quick for anybody listening, and it depends on what country you're in, but I found that some primary doctors do test for it. But if you want something really thorough, and then also to get the right medication, if that's the avenue that you want to get, look for a specialist. Maybe somebody, because I went to, like, it's called Carolina Attention Specialists, and that's all they
Ah,
do. And especially this particular woman specialized in adult women, which was even better. So I advise people to go that route.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. We've covered a lot of ground
We
here.
did. We bounced around, which is kind of my MO.
What is one thing? I'm totally putting you on the spot here. What is one thing that you wish you would have done sooner in your speaking business?
That's a good question. Okay. I might give you kind of a long answer to be able to squeeze in more than one. So I put my speaking business off, I think, for a noble reason. I had two very small children, one with special needs who had a really hard time with me traveling. So I didn't pursue it. But what I wish I would have done, because that was the case, I wish I would have tried to do more virtual events or brought them with me, which could have been an option. It would have been more expensive, but I could have
Right.
done it to be able to build the relationships and get the experience, to kind of like a very slow ramp up, if you will. I think that would have been helpful, because I
Mhm.
feel like I got sort of dumped out, and I had already written a couple of books, and
Right.
had done a good cajillion interviews. Like, I was already media seasoned and media
Mm.
friendly, as they say, but
Yeah.
I hadn't built the relationships yet. And I'm finding that that's one of the key parts, not just building
You're
relationships with,
catching up. You're
right,
catching up
exactly.
because you waited on the
Because I
speaking
waited.
end.
Mhm.
You're catching up now
Yeah.
because your authorship and podcasts and all of that is just blown up.
Yeah. But
That's
it's not just about building relationships with, potential clients who are going to hire you, but building relationships with other speakers.
Yes, yes. And sometimes this speaking business can be actually a very lonely business. You're standing in front of 500 or 5,000 people and it's glory, glory, glory. And an hour later, you're in your hotel room by yourself,
Pulling off your eyelashes. Yeah.
pulling up your eyelashes. I love it. Yeah, and so that's something. And one of my goals with my clients is to kind of pull everybody in off the island from doing it by themselves. And I do hope we'll get back to live events in 2022 because I do miss connecting people in that way. I've
Mhm.
even I've even created love relationships in some
You
of my
have?
yeah. So it's
Oh my
really cool.
gosh.
So lots of business relationships, but also some even
Some
love
romantic ones.
connections. Yeah, so cool.
That's so
Well,
fun.
Andrea, we could talk all day because I know that we love to talk about all of these things and how people can make some noise, speak their mind, own their strength. What's one final thing? If people want to get in touch with you, or is there any kind of download that they can grab, or where should they go and buy Make Some Noise?
So if they just want to get in touch with me, come and say hi. They heard me on your show. I'm at Hey Andrea Owen on Instagram. And if they're interested in the book, I have a lot of really amazing free bonuses. AndreaOwen.com/noise.
Noise. Love it.
Mhm.
Love it. How many followers do you have on Instagram?
I think 27,000, but I have 50,000 on TikTok, which happened in like 2 months.
Well,
It's
I'm not
it's
surprised because I
crazy.
see some of the things that you're doing and I'm like, damn, that girl's getting after it. Like, you really are, you do put yourself out there. You do make some noise. You do speak your mind and own your strength. And I just want to say thank you for being a great role model for all genders, really.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, my dad always said Andrea never met a camera she didn't like. So TikTok is my medium.
There you go. There you go. We'll have you back talking about your TikTok superstardom on another episode of the Wealthy Speakers Show. Thank you so much for being here. And with that, we will say, see you soon, Wealthy Speakers. Bye for now, everyone.